be the first nurses to help move their families out of poverty and to a better life. And they knew if they could get to college, their dream would come to be a reality. Well, sad enough, my mother was unable to follow that particular dream because her family was very poor. She was the second of 10 kids. So with that being said, there was one older sister that was able to attend college. So that took care of all the money that the family had. There was just no way possible my grandparents could afford to send 2 kids back in the 30s anywhere. And now my mother, let me go back a little bit. She was born June 16, 1923. So she is a part of that great generation. And as I said, we're gonna find out how she ended up in the military. Well, with her dream being shattered as becoming a nurse, she quickly had to come up with a plan B, which was not easy. She worked domestic, she cleaned houses, she was a cook, she was a seamstress, she worked in the cotton fields, in the peanut fields. She did everything she thought possible that would help move her closer to college. Well, my grandparents needed some of that money. So, as it stands, that's the way it worked back then. When you were old enough to work, everyone had to bring the money to the table. Your money was not your money, in other words. So with that being said, she saw there was no way she could afford to send herself to school. It just, it was just impossible. Well, one day her brother decided, he's the 3rd oldest, that he would join the military. He knew that would be one way, first of all, of leaving the South. The South was very bad for blacks back then, and they would do anything and everything to free themselves from that, from the Jim Crow era. So my uncle decided to join the Army, and he did. And during that time, one of his recruiters gave him what they called back then, it's known as a Negro paper, newspaper, a separate paper from the whites. They had their own newspaper, the blacks had their newspaper. Well, inside of that newspaper was an article that Uncle Sam wants you. Everybody know Uncle Sam, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, she couldn't believe that. The thing was, her brother recruiter mentioned to my uncle that if his sister could pass the test, all of the tests, she would be awarded some things after her service. One was a college education, something she dreamed of. She just couldn't believe it. But I want you to know now, there was a real war going on all of this time. Because when did the war start, World War II? Was it 1939, Mary?
In Europe, yeah, 41
In Europe.
for us.
Okay. So, with that being said, she knew that my grandparents would not hear that. That it's not a place for a girl to be going in the war, in a war zone, in the military. That was for men, so they thought. It was just never heard of, especially with African American women. There were no women, it was just unheard of at that time. So, with all that being said, she decided to take a chance, and she couldn't go from her hometown. There was no place for African Americans to enlist. There's just no place. So she had to go over to Tallahassee, Florida, which is about, give and take, 60 miles from her hometown of Moultrie, Georgia. Anybody ever heard of Moultrie?
Yeah.
Okay. Colquitt County. Okay, so she had her boyfriend to take her over. She tested. She passed her test in flying colors. She was top of her class in high school. This is what was so sad. With her, having such good grades, being such a good student all those years, for her to have to deploy back to going back into the fields and doing domestic work, she was just not hearing it. So I'm sure had this not happened, she would have found her way out of the, out of this situation one way or another. But she did. She went to Tallahassee. She passed all of her tests. She was given her physical. She passed that, and her paperwork and the date that she was to report to leave for basic training. Well, she went home and hid those papers tightly. and she swore my uncle, her best friend Margaret, and her boyfriend Johnny Lee to secrecy, that they would not let the cat out the bag until she was ready to tell my grandparents, because I'm sure my grandmother would have just either had a fit or killed her. I don't know, one or the other. But long story short, she went on. She continued to work in the field. She continued to do her domestic work for one of the wealthiest families in Moultrie. She just went about her daily as if nothing, had changed. But she knew in her heart of hearts that she couldn't wait. She knew the date and the time, but she was trying to figure out in her head, how am I gonna tell my parents what I've done, which is enlisted in the military. The war, I got ahead of myself, but the war was looking for African American women to go overseas to tackle a backlog of mail. That was one of the main reasons for getting them over. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune got together, pushed the president along with other black organizations in the War Department to let them go overseas as they did the Tuskegee Airmen back in World War II. And it happened. So I can't, go through the whole thing, but eventually my mother had to tell her parents what she had done, because it was almost weeks away from having to leave for basic training. So she told them over the dinner table in a prayer. So, hey, you gotta love it, So she did it in a prayer, and from what my grandpa opened she was a daddy's girl. So my grandpa opened his eyes in disbelief, and then she went through this thing about how she wanted them to be so proud of her, and how she wanted to send back an allotment. Oh, she used what she had. She was a smart cookie. And this money was gonna help them, and it did, it really did. But my grandmother, she stuck to her guns. This is no place for a woman, blah, 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 blah. And my poor grandpa, he was just lost for words. His heart was getting ready to leave. So long story short, my mother went to basic training in Fort Des Moines, Iowa. Can you imagine, from the deep south? This girl was moving. Must have blown her mind, because she only knew heat and sun and rain. So, and I recently found out that doing a research as I was writing about her story, which I've completed the book, but I'm putting it together. So all the details of what I'm saying now will make sense if you get a chance for me to come back and I'll read the book to you. So, but my mother did go off, and she completed basic training in Fort Des Moines, Iowa, and it was time to pick the battalion that would be sent overseas. And out of 855, meaning 55 black officers and 800 black women of color, there was a mistake made. There were 2 or 3 from a Mexican descent, as well as Puerto Rican. So women of color. And out of all these different states around us, my mother was one of the 800 chosen, handpicked by her commander to go overseas and serve. They went over to tackle a backlog of mail where the soldiers, the Red Cross workers, all of the government workers that were in the European theater at that time of operation was not getting mail. It had been like a 2-3 year backlog of mail. And you can only imagine being out on the front line, most of those people, and the government workers, and not hearing back from the families. It was sad, because what they had done, they had sent their white counterparts, female back to the States. So now you got all this big problem. The mail is not moving, it's just standing still. Cakes and packages, rats enjoying all this Christmas goodies that your mother sent, all these cookies and cakes, and it's just amazing. When I read the story, when I learned that my mother was a part of this battalion, which I did not know growing up, that's what made the book so good. I'm learning just like you. So it was just a shame, but they got together and formed the 688, Central Postal Delivery Battallion. They were self-sufficient. There was nothing like them. Nothing like them ever. They were not the first to go overseas. There was a group of black nurses that went over. And I want to say in 1943, and I think it was Liberia. So they were not the first, but there's a lot of things written about these women that history have to straighten out and make sure they say right and give credit where credit is due. They were not all black.
Amen.
Okay? There
Yes.
were women of color.
Yes.
So it was predominantly, and I went back and I changed that in my book because I want to give credit where credit is due. You know, so that's where we stand with that, but I'm so proud of all of them and the work that they've done to speed you up. They recently started getting recognition in let me go back. Nope, it was not 19. Okay, it was 2018 when the first monument was built to honor these women. And this is at Folk, Leavenworth, Kansas. And this was November 2018.
Yes, I've seen it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And this is to honor these women. And the lady on top is Major Charity Adam, the first black major ever. And she was one of the first to attend the officer school in Fort Des Moines, Iowa.
What am I looking at?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the monument. This is 28. 6 months to complete 3-4 years of backlog mail packages. Can you believe that? First of all, they were setting them up to fail. And the commander had spoken to them and explained to them, the world is looking at you, so you gotta do better. You gotta do whatever they say you can't do, you gotta do. Long story short, the women were given 6 months, and I've got it on my mother's discharge papers, to complete a job. They completed it in 3 months.
Wow.
They were able to move from Birmingham, England. Is it pronounced Roms, France? R-O. Anywho, they was able to go to the next France and to Paris, France. And my mother was with all the 3 waves. She was the last to come back at the end of the war.
Wow.
And these women showed the government what they were made of. They were from around the world, some college grads, high school grads, some not at all. But they got together and banned the sisterhood. That was amazing. It was amazing. But when they came home, when they were discharged, they was discharged at different times, different places. My mother was discharged from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Many of them was from, was discharged, I think, somewhere at Fort Dix, New Jersey. They were not given a parade. No one was there to meet them, to shake their hands and say, job well done. No one was there to say thank you for your service. So in 2018, during the time that we were at Fort Leavenworth, they gave a parade, and my son and my brother and I were able to ride in that parade and represent our mother. And it was something, at that time, it was maybe 6 or 7 known living women at that time. Can you imagine what they must have felt? Given a parade, they rolled out the carpet for them. I mean, they just treated them with lavished. Whatever they asked for, they got it that day. Because they were never thanked for their service. So today, and as long as I breathe, I say thank you for your service. Because they deserve that and more. And being Congressional Gold Medalist, I'm choking up. May they rest in peace.
No.